Hi, everyone. I'm Charity Lighton with Silver Fern. I'm so excited to be here. And I am the most excited to be here because I get a chance to talk to Karan. Karan is with us, and Karan is, I don't even know how to describe you. I'm like, I tell people, I tell my husband, I was like, honey, I'm not kidding. He's the smartest person I've ever talked to. So I love when we get to talk to you and you answer some of the questions that we are getting. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Tell us a little bit about your passion and how you became this crazy world leader in gut health.
Yeah, I started studying. I'm a microbiologist by academic training, so it's a natural fit for me to be working with bacteria and really studying and understanding bacteria. And of course, now that we have the Human Microbiome Project and all these great research, huge research institutes putting out work that looks at how bacteria really impacts the human body, it really brings to light the things that we've been studying as microbiologists for a long period of time. We've always known instinctively that microbes play a huge role in not only the function of the human body, but the health and wellness of the human body. Most people know about microbes as being bad, right? Most people only know about bad bacteria,
Right.
and the illnesses that they can cause and all that. But most people don't realize that 98 to 99% of microbes out there in the world are actually benign or good for you. It's 1 to 2% of microbes that are actually problematic. So the vast majority of microbes really get overshadowed by the few bad ones like C. diff and salmonella that it's infective, or E. coli that's infective. And so as a microbiologist, it's become my passion to really study this interaction between the human hosts and the microbes and the health and wellness that it encompasses, and then of course educate not only the public but especially the medical community. And that's a lot of what I do is, I do talks all around the world. I did about 50 or so talks at conferences last year. I'm already doing 3 this month, so it's already starting to get busy.
Yeah.
And this is probably one of the most important topics of our time because it gives us a real, true understanding of how we're actually built and how do we fix ourselves.
Yeah, I love it. That's why, I know you're such a busy guy. So anytime I get a chance to talk to you, I'm like, okay, I love it. And what I find fascinating is you talked that, you go and you educate some of the medical community. A lot of the things that we know about medicine have been around for decades and decades and decades. But what I find fascinating is, well, first of all, you mentioned the Human Microbiome Project. And so maybe I should ask you, why all of a sudden is gut health everywhere, probiotics everywhere? Why this surge as of late?
Yeah, and the Human Microbiome Project was in a way born out of something called the Human Genome Project. You may remember in the early 90s there was something called the Human Genome Project where they were trying to map out the complete human genome, right? We were trying to figure out what each gene did in the human chromosome and how that related to diseases. Because the idea at that point was that our genes dictated everything about us. And deformities in certain genes is what led to diseases. So something really curious happened once we sequenced the human genome, right? Something that was very surprising. Now, if you think about humans, we're at the top of the food chain. We're at the top of the evolutionary ladder. We dominate the earth over every other species there is. We're the smartest things walking the planet. We have the most capabilities. But we only have about 22,000 genes in our chromosomes. A rice plant has more than twice the amount of genes that we have. An earthworm has somewhere around 48,000 genes. So the question from the Human Genome Project was, how is it that we do all the things we do? How is it that we're so sophisticated, yet we have fewer genes than a rice plant does? Right? And that left a huge open-ended question to figure out what really makes a human a human. Then came along the Human Microbiome Project, because then scientists realized that what we're covered with, both inside and outside, are microbes. And they really wanted to understand what types of microbes inhabited our body and what kind of contributions they made to us being human. What we come to learn is we have well over 3.5 million microbial genes in and on our body. And in fact, we utilize all of those microbial genes for most of our daily function. So the thing that closed the gap for us in terms of the lack of genes that we have compared to every other species on Earth, rice plants and earthworms and things like that, to the number of genes that we utilize to become these sophisticated, high-ordered creatures comes from the microbes. The microbes provide us the genetic elements in order for us to perform the functions that we do as human beings. And so
okay, so what you're saying then, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying humans are smart enough that we go, we don't need the genes for some of these functions. We've learned to outsource those needs to an environment that's always been around us, but that over time we've gotten in the way in a sense, and we've created a barrier between our human genes and the need that we have for this bacteria that we've learned to outsource, and we actually need them more than we probably even know we do in our brain.
Absolutely. So another estimate that really illustrates this is, some of the latest estimations are that about 99% of all metabolic functions on a daily basis come from the genes that are produced by the microbes in our body.
That's amazing.
Our genes account for 1% or less of what we are and what we can do. Right? So 99% of who we are, what we can do on a daily basis, what we need to do to survive on a daily basis comes from the microbes that live in and on us. And we have systematically over the last couple of decades created systems to destroy these microbes. Things like preservatives in food, fluoride in drinking water, of course, the overuse of antibiotics, the overuse of antimicrobials, both hand sanitizers, soaps, all these things. And of course, our separation from the environment. We live in these concrete jungles and sterilized environments. We no longer get the right type of interactions that we need with the microbes that are out there in the environment that are there for us, really.
And I'm guilty of that myself. Like I don't get out in nature as much as I probably should. I mean, I don't really expose myself to the outside environment as much as now I'm learning. I'm like, wow, there's so much in this world that was designed to benefit my body, and I've kind of created a barrier there. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things that we now see happening in terms of dysfunction that's going on in our body. We get a lot of questions from people that are really trying to heal some of the dysfunction that's happened in terms of an overgrowth of Candida, IBS, Crohn's. I mean, we see so many of these things, and it seems to me, I'm like, wow, this is becoming an epidemic because of what we've created. So maybe you could go through some of those and talk to us about, how to heal or what they've caused from, or I mean, you're the expert on this.
So one of the most important things to understand is there's something called the microbiome metabolic immune axis. And it's a fancy term, but it's basically this part of the body where all these three systems basically come together and crossroads, right? So the metabolic system is the system that responds to the food in your body, how it breaks down the food, how to digest the food, whether insulin is increased, decreased, all the hormones like ghrelin, adiponectin, all these things, how they respond to the diet and the calories coming in. Then the immune system, most people know what that is. And then the microbiome is a collection of organisms in the gut itself. Now, how those three systems interact is highly critical to the development and progression of multifaceted, complex diseases like Crohn's, IBS, colitis, and then, of course, a lot of immune dysfunctions, including things like Hashimoto's and autoimmunity. All of those things start at this axis, right? So what is happening dysfunctionally in that axis is the communication between the microbiome and the immune system is disrupted. So the microbiome is this huge collection of good commensal beneficial bacteria that cover your entire digestive tract. Now, your entire digestive tract is also makes up about 80% of your immune system. Right? So now the immune cells in your digestive tract are coated with bacteria, and yet they have the important job of distinguishing between good and bad bacteria. What happens is it's the role of the microbiome to communicate with your immune system to identify themselves as good, friendly bacteria. If that doesn't happen, if that communication is not there, then the immune system tends to just start attacking everything it sees. So what's happening in the case of, let's say, colitis or IBS or Crohn's is that your immune system in your intestinal tract is now just randomly attacking the friendly bacteria within your intestinal tract itself. So you got this constant inflammation, this degradation of the intestinal lining, all of this damage that comes about from unwarranted attacks from your immune system to the friendly bacteria within your gut. And that comes from the breakdown in communication between those two systems.
Okay. So what's a remedy for something like that?
So the remedy is to increase and improve the communication between your microbiome and your immune system, right? So that's where the breakdown is. Now that sounds really, kind of silly and simple, but it can be done. Now, what orchestrates that communication in large part are environmental bacteria. There's enough evidence that shows that constant exposure to certain types of environmental bacteria are very important for the upregulation of something called a pattern recognition system. Pattern recognition system is something that is used by the immune system to identify friendly and non-friendly bacteria. If the pattern recognition system is not working well, then your immune system has a tendency to attack everything it sees because it's not recognizing the good friendly bacteria that exists within your gut naturally. Now, how you upregulate that pattern recognition system is exposing your gut and your immune system in your gut to certain types of good bacteria from the environment. And some of those are like the Bacillus endospores. We've done a lot of work with Bacillus endospores, and we've completed a few clinical trials recently to show that the Bacillus endospores increase this ability of your immune system to recognize all the good friendly bacteria. At the same time, recognize bad bacteria. So it can actually attack bad bacteria as well. So these environmental bacteria play an orchestrative role in really orchestrating and managing the communication between the immune system and all of the bacteria that lives within the gut. Okay,
so I heard you now, if I'm understanding this right, there's essentially three things that are involved in us feeling well. I'm going to generalize it. In us feeling well, okay? So we've got our metabolic functions, and we hear a lot about that in the news with insulin resistance or just how our body functions. That's one we hear a lot about. The second one is the immune system. I hear you saying that. I've heard about the immune system since I was little. My mom used to always talk about, strengthening your immune system. But the third one that you mentioned is something that we really don't talk a lot about, and that's how the bacteria and the microbiome in our body, how essential that is. Again, generalizing to us feeling well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and here's the crazy part about it. The microbiome controls how your immune system functions and how your metabolic system functions as well. So when the microbiome is off and the communication between the microbiome and the immune system and metabolic function is off, it creates disease. We now know that. Now there's significant evidence to show that the first line of defense in our immune system is called the innate immune system, right? The innate immune system and the communication between the microbiome, if that goes off, it creates all sorts of complex illnesses. Everything, like I mentioned before, from autoimmune conditions to even things like anxiety, depression, psoriasis, eczema, all these things that we tend to suffer from start with the breakdown in that communication. And
it's fascinating to me. I mean, like just what you just mentioned there. I had no idea, Karan. I had no idea depression and anxiety could in some way be linked to gut health and bacteria. And with your team and so much research that's going on right now, we go, these can be linked. Things like allergies, things like even I'm going to say this. I think it's okay for me to say this. Even addiction in the brain can be linked to how our body is working and how that microbiome is communicating to the rest of our body. Is that accurate to say that?
Absolutely, because one of the things that people don't realize or really recognize is that the vast majority of important hormones are produced in the microbiome. Things like brain-derived neurotropic factor, other hormones, serotonin, dopamine, all these things that are really important to give you balance, so that you don't become addicted to certain things, or you don't channel your frustrations and obsessive behaviors into different channels. All of those things require balance of these hormones, and a lot of those hormones are produced in large part in the gut. And so if the gut is off, you're not getting enough dopamine, you're not getting enough serotonin, or you're getting too much. And those can all throw off the balance.
Yeah. So I used to be one of those people that was always like, okay, do everything you can to heal things with food, right? I was always such a believer that a lot of this disease comes from a nutrient deficiency. And I still believe that. But now I'm adding another deck of cards here. And now I'm going, okay, so it could be nutrient deficiency or bacteria deficiency. That's a whole new ballgame, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of times the nutrient deficiency can drive the microbial dysbiosis as well, the microbial deficiency. So it plays both roles. I mean, one of the most important things we can do for our microbiome is feeding it, right? Feeding it the appropriate things. Of course,
Right.
the microbes within our gut need food. They need nutrients in order to proliferate and perform all the functions that they perform. So it does come down to nutrition. But now that we understand the microbiome, now we understand better who the real player is in either facilitating, perpetuating, or preventing a lot of these illnesses.
Okay, I love it. I love it. So I want to make sure we at least address a couple illnesses. The first being Candida. Well, more specifically, we have Candida in our body, the overgrowth of Candida. That's probably a better way to say that. So
Yeah.
can you touch a little bit on that for me?
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction that you made there, where you say it's actually an overgrowth candida, because a lot of people think of candida as an infection, right? An infection is typically something that comes in from the outside, like when you get the cold or flu or food poisoning. It's a microbe or virus that comes in from the outside and actually infects your body. Candida is a commensal organism that exists in your body from the day you're born, and it exists in virtually every orifice in your body, in your gut, in your nasal upper respiratory system, nasopharynx, your urogenital tract. We've got almost 200 different types of Candida, yeast in our body. So there's a huge diversity of Candida. Now, anytime Candida is overgrown, it's actually a symptomology of something else that's happening. Candida is a real opportunistic grower. It doesn't overgrow unless your microbiome is suppressed for some reason, your immune system is suppressed, or a combination of the two. Now, what we've seen a lot from a clinical standpoint is a lot of people with Candida overgrowth also tend to suffer from things like heavy metal toxicity. Heavy metal toxicity can really screw up your immune system. And when your immune system is screwed up, it gives chance for Candida to start to overgrow. Heavy metal toxicity can also screw up your microbiome, because a lot of microbes are very susceptible to certain types of metal compounds. Like, for example, we know that silver, colloidal silver, is a good antimicrobial because it can kill a lot of bacteria. So when you have heavy metal toxicity, it actually screws up your microbial balance. So then you can end up having opportunistic Candida growth. So when you have an overgrowth of Candida, it becomes important to target the Candida, sure, with a number of things like undercyclinic acid is good, propolis is a good way of targeting it, but then it becomes even more important to go after the underlying cause, which is the dysbiosis in the gut, the imbalance of good and bad bacteria, and then the dysfunction of your immune system, a lot of times which can come from heavy metal toxicity.
Okay, and so something that hope I understand correctly too is that you can go on a Candida cleanse. I did a 6-week cleanse. I thought it was fabulous, but I think what I missed is that if I was killing off that overgrowth, I wasn't replanting new bacteria, that new healthy bacteria. And because Candida is so opportunistic, eventually it's just going to come right back in. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So you can bring the overall growth of Candida down, but the space that it occupies, it can come right back within a couple of weeks once you stop doing whatever it is you're doing. The only way to really eliminate the Candida overgrowth is to replace the Candida with microbes that are beneficial. And one of the most effective ways to do that is using something called competitive exclusion. Competitive exclusion is the use of other microbes that can actually compete with the Candida and actually drive them out. And when you drive the Candida out, that open real estate in the gut now is taken up by good bacteria that'll prevent Candida from settling in there ever again. And so the use of an effective probiotic with the cleanse or with the Candida treatment like propolis or undercyclinic acid becomes extremely important, because you have to replace the Candida with good bacteria.
Yeah, I love it. I know for myself personally, I mean, we won't get into sugar cravings that much in this video, but I will say this, it's pretty fascinating to me. I really only changed two things. I started taking probiotic that has the bacillus, which is the silver fern probiotic, and I started intermittent fasting. And I'm telling you, I feel a difference in my sugar cravings, which I'm attributing to some of that bacteria in my body, and maybe that competitiveness, it's forcing it out, and I feel different. I feel more, absolutely more in control, and I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Candida thrives on simple sugars, on carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, things that get broken down to fructose and glucose. So when they are overgrown, they can actually create those cravings, of course, to perpetuate their own growth. Right now, when you take an effective probiotic like the spore-based probiotic by silver fern, you will actually displace the Candida, and then along with them goes out the cravings.
Yeah, I love it. I felt it.
Yeah, those cravings, and a lot of people think that, oh, I have a sweet tooth, as if you were born with that need for sugar. No, it's any kind of craving is dictated by the microbes that grow within your body. And so the cravings can be alleviated or eliminated by changing the microbial environment. You mentioned intermittent fasting. It's another extremely important thing. One of the reasons why intermittent fasting has benefited you is because when you fast, there are certain types of bacteria that are able to grow only in the presence of only in the context of having no food, in the absence of food. One of them is like Akkermansia. Akkermansia muciniphila is a very important bacteria that grows within your gut that improves your metabolic function, improves insulin sensitivity, makes you leaner, reduces cravings, all of these great beneficial things. This Akkermansia can only grow when there's no food in the system. So if we're constantly feeding ourselves, we're barely giving us 6, 7, 8 hours before we're eating again, we're not allowing for the regrowth of these important bacteria. So having some fasted time within your daily cycle is extremely important as well.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's fascinating. Well, I feel like we've got to address one other thing while we've got you, because your time is precious. But I feel like, could we talk just a little bit about irritable bowel syndrome? I know sometimes that's a blanket statement, but could we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it is. It's a very blanket symptom or condition. In fact, the name of it is really funny to me because probably about 20, 25 years ago, a lot of patients started showing up in doctors' offices saying, I get cramping, I get bloating, my gut is just irritated. I eat this and I get bloating and I have to run to the bathroom. And of course, the medical community did not have an answer for what that was, so they just named it an irritated bowel, right? So that's where the IBS came from. But now we know that the vast majority of IBS is actually something called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or it can come from early onset of Crohn's, colitis, those kind of things. So there's many different things that can actually affect your gut to create symptoms of IBS. IBS is a huge blanket syndrome, really. So the things that are most likely happening if you have IBS are an overgrowth of your own lactobacillus bacteria in the terminal end of your small intestine. So the small intestine is designed as the digestion and for digestion and assimilation of nutrients. That's where it all happens, right? That's where you produce your pancreatic enzymes. That's where you've got your bile salts and all these things that help your body break down the food that you're consuming and then absorb nutrients. There's not a lot of fermentation happening in the small intestine. There shouldn't be. Now, when the food that becomes undigested in the small intestine moves down into the large intestine, that's where the fermentation is supposed to happen. There's a separation between the large and small intestine. That's something called the ileocecal valve. The ileocecal valve is a valve that keeps the contents of the large intestine from moving back into the small intestine. Now, if there's dysfunction in the ileocecal valve, or you have too much pressure from gas being produced in this large intestine, or if you have dysfunction in what we call the peristaltic activity or the migrating motor complex, that's the electrical and muscle movement of the intestines to keep pushing things down and pushing things out. Mm-hmm. If there's dysfunction in all of that, things can move up the ileocecal valve and back into the small intestine. One of the things that moves up in there is bacteria. Your own lactobacillus that is abundant in the first part of the large intestine will move up into the end of the small intestine and start fermenting over there. When they start fermenting over there, it produces a lot of discomfort, gas, cramping in your small bowel after you eat food. And that is the vast majority of symptoms that are associated with IBS. Comes from this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So one of the best things you can do for SIBO is to fast, because fasting improves the peristaltic activity. It gives your migrating motor complex, which is an electrical signaling that pushes everything through your intestines down and kind of cleans out your intestine. It allows that to function. It also allows for the growth of good bacteria within your small intestines and kind of suppresses the growth of the fermentive out of place, displaced bacteria. Then the other thing you can do is actually consuming the right types of probiotics, like the spore-based probiotics in the cervical fern product actually have clinical trials that show that they actually target overgrown bacteria in the small intestines and brings down their levels. So they can actually reduce the amount of overgrown bacteria in the small intestine.
Well, I've got a terrible confession that I need to make. So as a nutritionist and talking to different people that have had irritable bowel syndrome, one of those things that I'm going to confess this right here. It's terrible, but I would say to them, hey, go get on a good probiotic and see if that helps. Well, now listening to you, the crazy thing, Karan, is guess what type of strain of bacteria is in most of the probiotics out there?
Exactly. It's the one that's causing the problem.
It's a lactobacillus. So now I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if the lactobacillus, like you said, that's something that's naturally in us that passes, I understand, right, from mother to baby, right? That's how we get that strain in our body. But the problem is it's, from my understanding, you correct me because you're the expert, that's something that is meant to stay internally. And when I go and recommend somebody take that externally, I'm now creating more of a problem instead of helping the problem.
Exactly. So a lot of doctors who now specialize in digestive health and are pretty well in tune with the latest research will tell an IBS or SIBO patient to not take any probiotics at all, because you're really not helping the problem. What you already have is an overabundance of lactobacillus in your small bowel. The last thing you want to do is add more lactobacillus into the situation. And so the vast majority of those probiotics not only will not benefit you, but will probably cause even more problems.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I should say this, when I was telling people to take it, it was just family and friends. I don't practice medicine, just family and friends. I'm like, hey, I've read about the benefit of probiotics, go try this out. But I'm learning so much more. It's got to be the right type of probiotics. Otherwise, not only does it not help you with somebody with IBS, it actually could make the symptoms worse.
Absolutely. And even, I think there's going to be some good data coming out that shows that certain strains of lactobacillus may be a contributing factor to the development of Crohn's itself, an overabundance. And lactobacillus in general are just good bacteria for you. But again, we're screwing up the balance by every day adding hundreds of billions of these CFUs of these particular strains into our systems with these probiotic products. And we're just not designed to have that. Nowhere in nature do we get 300-400 billion CFUs of 15-20 different lactobacillus strains in our daily diet. Our ancestors just didn't get that. Like you mentioned, lactobacillus comes from mother to child. It inoculates you both in utero and then through the birthing process and shortly after birth as well. But, 838 days after birth, about 2.5 years after birth, you've got your full established microbiome with all the lactobacillus and bifidobacter that you're ever going to have. And those strains are very specialized in their function within the gut. So to keep supplementing with them is really, really kind of old news. It's old science that now has been shown to, not only not be beneficial, but in some cases could be problematic.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, like I said, Kron, I could sit here and talk to you for hours and hours and hours. Hopefully, we address some of the questions a lot of people have had. I know you've made things a lot clearer for me, and I love it. I love that there's somebody like you that's going out and educating the rest of us so that we have a better understanding of what's going on inside of our body, that ideally, when we know better, we can do better and then feel better.
Absolutely. And what, one of the messages I always want to give to people is that what's so exciting about understanding that microbes play a really, really important role in the vast majority of chronic illnesses that we suffer from as a species, as a human species. What's so exciting and good about that is we now know that most of those can be reversed, can be changed. We used to think that these chronic illnesses we suffer from were genetic, were congenital, which means if it is genetic, then we can't change anything about our genes, right? But we now know that it's an environmental issue. It's the ecology in our gut that's off, and that alone can create all of these chronic illnesses. So the real promising thing is that it can change. We can reverse many conditions that we thought were endemic or chronic. We can reverse many things that we thought we would have to live with for the rest of our lives. And that's what's really special, and that's what's really important. So this kind of knowledge is absolutely paramount to wellness. And really, we're at the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to know and so much more to learn. So, stay tuned.
I love it. I love the message of hope. I love all of it. So thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.